So who would be crazy enough to go on record at the beginning of the year and make predictions about Donald Trump, the stock market, the Premier League, Aberdeen, and the property market? Well, only us, of course. We're the only ones daft enough to do that. And this week, you can listen to our results.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning property investors come to be informed and inspired. You may remember, if you're a Property Podcast listener, from way back in our very oldest intro, there was the line that property investors come to do something else and laugh at our expense. But I think we should have brought that intro back for this episode, because we are reviewing our predictions, and yeah, it's an interesting one.
So I think before we get going, I think it's fair to say it's been a bit of a strange year, which is me already making excuses for how much we're going to get wrong when reviewing our predictions this year. I think we're even mad to do this episode.
This year is going to be a particularly tough one to listen back to. Without even looking, I know that we've got a fair bit wrong this year. But surprisingly, I believe that we have actually got some things right as well. From memory, those are mainly around football. So I don't know what this episode's actually going to play out property-wise, but shall we get into it?
Let's do it. So, Rob, we often start with our predictions around cities. And I don't know if this is here first because we normally do it, or this is because you're going to be very, very happy after we review what you said. But before we get into actually what happened, let's listen to what we predicted. So I'm going to predict two of the top three for England, and that's easy for me. I think Leeds and Liverpool, plus one other, will make up the top three of England. Loads of other cities are in contention to join them, but those two I feel really comfortable with.
Well, I agree with you on those two. Liverpool, still so much value there. Affordability is so good, it's hard to see how that wouldn't be right up there. Leeds as well did well last year, and I think it's only picking up steam, so I think that'll be in there again. But there are so many contenders for the other spots that I'm bound to be wrong about some of these. So in no particular order, I've got Liverpool, Leeds, Nottingham, which also did well last year, and I think it's got a lot further to go. I've got Leicester in there, which I'm not at all confident about. And for my fifth one, I think I'm trying to be a bit too clever. But what I've actually put is a weird one, which is Bristol.
I'm going to counter you, Rob. You didn't know I was going to do this. I'm going to say that Bristol will be in England's bottom five. Well, bravo, Mr. Dix. What a performance. What an absolute performance. So let's reel off the top five as of the end of November. So the top five are Nottingham in first place, then following on, Manchester second, Leeds third, Liverpool fourth, Leicester fifth. So you predicted five cities and you got 4 out of the 5. Now there might be a couple of people scoffing going, you only got 4 out of 5. But to predict that any in the top 5 is tough. To predict 4 of the top 5 is fantastic. And I poo-pooed Bristol, and I actually came mid-table. So you weren't right, but you weren't as wrong as I said you were going to be. So, sir, congratulations. That is a job very well done in a particularly difficult market. I think one thing's for certain, while the rest of the episode may go downhill here, we seem to have a bit of a knack, or at least you do, for picking the right cities.
Yep, that's our podcast for this week. Thank you for listening. Really enjoyed this one. No, we can't stop it there, but I wish we could. My general thesis on Bristol was wrong, to be fair, especially given the accelerated trend of people moving out of London as a result of coronavirus, which we did not predict. I thought that Bristol should really have been a major beneficiary of that, and therefore it would be absolutely nailed on for a top 5, because I believed, as a result of that trend that was already lightly in place, Bristol had further to go. But apparently it didn't. Your prediction, Rob, shall we call this a mixed bag and be charitable? You got Leeds and Liverpool, so 2 out of 5 there.
Well, I mean, you're being nice, Rob, because I picked the top 3 and Liverpool was 4th. So I was very close. Leeds was in there, but so I only got 1. But I was very, very close of getting 2 with Liverpool. But then my wild card prediction turned out to be very wild. I'm actually going to make a prediction that Aberdeen, which is currently bottom of the UK over the last 12 months, will be in the UK's top 5 by the end of 2020.
Yeah, Aberdeen always seemed like a risky one, and that risk did not pay off. Aberdeen actually came bottom out of the whole of the UK, losing 1.8% compared to Nottingham in the top spot, putting on 5.3%. If you want to claim mitigating circumstances, Rob, we didn't see coronavirus coming. Collapse in the oil price as a result of that was always going to hurt Aberdeen. When the oil futures went negative around mid-year, you could probably tell at that point Aberdeen was not going to pay off for you.
Yeah. I contacted the tourism board. I went to local property network meetings there to try and bolster the market, but nothing, even my powers couldn't drag it up from the bottom. It's probably the most wrong I've been on any prediction in all the years of podcasting. So, yeah, I think we should swiftly move on.
Let's do that. Let's move on to our predictions for price growth for the UK as a whole and hear what we predicted for that one. Could have given myself a bit more leeway on this one and say actually 1 to 3% for the UK as a whole.
My prediction will go 2 to 4%. I think it's worth saying that looking back then, your range was probably a safe range. A lot of people were coming in at that level, and mine was a bit bolshy. But it turned out that neither of us were bolshy enough because, incredibly, and this is incredible, and I said to you, Rob, before we started recording, I think this has been really underreported this year. House prices so far, so we've got the 12 months of data. It doesn't include December, admittedly, so this may come down slightly. We normally use nationwide figures, but everyone's figures are roughly the same. And nationwide, over the last 12 months, has seen property growth of 6.5%. I knew it was up and I knew it was higher than average, and I've kind of heard some numbers banded around. But when you actually go and get all the data and lay it out in front of you, it's like, wow. I mean, Halifax, I think, is over 7%.
It is absolutely crazy because we obviously made our predictions without realising that coronavirus had been a thing. If we'd predicted that one, you'd never hear the end of it. But when coronavirus happened, everyone else came out and revised their predictions down, dramatically down. The consensus seemed to be a drop of about 10% over 2020. And you said, Rob, in one of the episodes that we did around the pandemic in the summer and the property cycle and all the rest of it, that you thought that by the end of 2020, prices would be more or less the same as when they started the year. Maybe up a little bit, maybe down a little bit. So you could call that a moderate revision of the prediction, but not really, because the range was 2 to 4% anyway. But for it to then end up at over 6% is just crazy.
I know. Like, most people are very kind about our predictions. But when I made that prediction, as I said before, people actually scoffed and were like, what? They could be up slightly. Are you mad? And it turns out I wasn't mad enough. The market is a wonderful thing. And this is why predictions is a silly business to get into. Because nobody, and please go and troll the internet and find it if you can, but nobody at the middle of the year, at the height of the coronavirus, was predicting figures to be so strong. So, an incredible year. And Rob, I think we'll need to talk about this in the new year a little bit more. But you could argue, and it doesn't mean it's going to continue, but there's an argument to say, well, that's the first year of the boom cycle out the way in the 18-year property cycle. We've had the mid-cycle wobble, and that's the first year of growth afterwards. Now, will it happen next year? Well, you'll have to wait for our predictions. After hearing the rest of this episode, you may not want to listen to them anyway. But the point is that it's a year of growth that we haven't seen for a long time, which has been in one of the hardest times for humankind for nearly a century. So a truly bonkers year on so many levels, and I still find it hard to believe those numbers, Rob, because they are just so strong. And
it's not just because of stamp duty being temporarily removed either, because that trend was in place before stamp duty was removed, and you can see it happening at all different price points. Of course, the properties in the price range that benefit from the stamp duty removal the most have benefited the most, but it is across the board. So yeah, next week we'll have to take a punt on what's going to happen next year. Is it going to be a cooling off, or are we calling it as the start of the bull run? Well, we will have to wait and see. Now, coming into our next prediction, we have a long and proud history on this podcast of being wrong about predictions when it comes to London. Let's see what we said would happen this year.
I think London will be positive, but not in real terms. So what that means is I believe the growth of London will be less than inflation. So inflation, if that ends up at 2.5%, for example, I believe London will be less than 2.5%.
I'm going to say that London will not be the worst performing region, but I do think that prime London will get a boost from the return to a bit more economic certainty, and it seems like prime prices have bottomed out, so I'm hoping that with a bit of a boost there, it'll finish 2020 off the bottom.
Very pleased to continue that trend, Rob. So, what happened in London? Well, it turns out, Rob, that London actually had a pretty decent year, better than we were expecting. At least when you compare it to recent years.
Yeah, the figures we've got for the regions are a bit out of date because Nationwide only produced these quarterly, so we've only got the Q3 numbers. But as of those figures, London was up 4.4%. It's a really, really good year by recent standards. It may be pulled down by the final quarter, but even so, I think it's probably quite safe to say that it will be positive in real terms, i.e. higher than inflation. Therefore, wrong on that one. However, need to take the wins on London where we can. I said that it would not be the worst performing region, and it will not be. As of the Q3 figures, at least, London actually outperforming the North, the East Midlands and the West Midlands, among other regions, which is very surprising indeed.
Yeah, and Home Track measures different boundaries. So it's not a region on Home Track, it's a city report. But the city report of Home Track up to November, which is more recent data, but we weren't referring to this, to be fair, or to a regional prediction, has London up 2.7%, which is still growing more in real terms. And it also outperforms cities like Newcastle, Oxford, Southampton, Bournemouth, Cambridge, and yes, as you heard, Aberdeen.
So the next prediction that we made was around the Bank of England base rate. Let's have a listen to that one.
I'm going to say that the base rate will go no higher than where it is now, which is 0.75%. Maybe lower, not saying, but I'm saying at no point in the year will it go higher than 0.75%.
Okay, can I have that one as a win? Easy.
Yeah, well done, Rob. That was an easy win. So let's see if we can carry on that streak and listen to what we said about the budget. There will be a big announcement in the budget. Now, that's the kind of point of a budget. There are big announcements, but there will be a big announcement that affects property. It would be a radical overhaul or a brand new introduction of something new that really impacts the market.
I think in general, the budget is going to be a big one. The new government has got a massive majority. They're right at the start of their term. This is the perfect time for them to do things that they want to get done that might not be popular in the short term. I think the budget in 2020 is going to be talked about a lot.
You know what, Rob? I think it's not right, but it's not wrong, because there wasn't really a budget. There was lots of massive economic announcements, and any of those could have been branded as a budget. They were far bigger. But to claim that we were predicting those announcements is a farce as well. So I'm going to say neutral on this one. I don't think we got it right, but I don't think we got it wrong. It was just a bonkers year where this gets torn up, really, as a prediction.
Yeah, I'd say, if anything, we're probably right, but for massively the wrong reasons. So maybe best to just strike this one from the record.
So last few years, we talked about the stock market, and once again, I decided to talk about a market that I know very little about. There'll be a minimum of a stock market correction, but probably a stock market crash in the next 18 months. That will start in America. The news will probably be whatever happens to cause that crash will be led by America, and the UK will follow.
So by correction, you mean a fall of at least 10%?
Correct. To add to that, a crash I see as 20% or more.
Well, Rob, I think you're actually perhaps more of a market sage than you like to let on, because it was a couple of years ago that you predicted a crash in the price of Bitcoin. Then it happened about 3 days after the episode went out. And then this year you said there'd be a stock market correction. And by March, it was happening. So you can actually say your general market predictions are doing better than the property predictions. But I'm guessing you didn't predict the trigger for that unless you were just keeping it very quiet.
No, I wasn't. I would have bought much more loo roll and a few more face masks if I'd known that. But I feel a little bit disappointed with this because I'm not going to get the credit for this one. Even though I'm right, and even though it always takes a trigger, I think a lot of people were listening going, yeah, but come on. So was it due a correction or a crash in the first place? Before coronavirus? Yes, I think it really was. Will I get any credit for this? Probably not.
No, I'd say the US market in particular was just kind of looking for a reason. Everyone was getting very nervous about valuations, but what a reason we got. So yeah, this one correct, but I would have been more impressed if you'd predicted the pandemic as well. So our next one away from property was on the result of the US election. So let's have a listen to that one.
Shall we both say in or out at the same time, just to make it interesting?
Okay.
So after 3. 1, 2, 3, in. Oh! That was more boring than I'd hoped for. Okay, well, at the time of recording, we still could technically be correct. Can we get away with that one?
No, I don't think we can. But then again, I don't want to be an expert on politics anyway. So I think we should move on to feel on safer ground with the next category, football. I believe that Liverpool will win the Premier League. My God, I feel so nervous saying that out loud, and especially publicly. Well, shall we talk about your hometown team then, Watford? Will they stay in the Premier League, Rob?
I do know that there's been a change of manager recently. Well, there have been a lot of changes of manager recently, but there was one a couple of weeks ago that seemed smart and might be someone who turns things around, but I'm still going to say Watford will go down.
Oh, Rob. I think they'll stay up. I think they'll do just enough to stay up.
Oh, well, that's a nice place to wrap up these predictions. A double win.
Well, yeah, I got the Watford bit wrong, actually. I said Watford would stay up. Watford did end Liverpool's unbeaten run and then got relegated afterwards, which is just crazy. But that's football. So, generally, not too bad with the predictions there. A bit of a mixed bag overall, Rob. And actually, although we gave ourselves a bit of stick at the top of the episode, to get a reasonable amount right in what has been a crazy, crazy year. And where we've been wrong in seemingly the right direction in most cases. Even Trumpet was close, but I mean, we were wrong. But probably with the exception of my Aberdeen prediction, I think I'm not embarrassed too much about what we said. I feel there's some sort of justification, or at least a story I can tell myself about why we got some of the things wrong. And I'm actually surprised by how much we got right in this truly bonkers year.
Yeah, I'm buying into this story. I think this year shows how silly predictions are in general. And of course, a year when we've got a load of stuff wrong, I'm going, oh, this whole thing's silly. But it is, because you have no idea really what's going to come along in the future. And this year is the perfect example of that. But in a year like this, I'm going to take being less wrong than most as a win. Because Trump is a great example. If you listen to most people, Biden was going to absolutely walk it by double digits. And it was not even close, not even a thing. And that turned out to be dramatically wrong. Property prices, again, at the start of the year, most people were saying roughly the same thing, but after coronavirus happened, everyone revised their predictions and ended up being massively, massively wrong. Far more wrong than if they just kept their predictions where they were to start with. Now, again, that's not to say that these things won't happen in the future, but they certainly didn't happen this year. And obviously I would want to draw attention to this one again, but I'm quite pleased with the city predictions, because one of the things that we've talked about consistently on the podcast over years is the importance of picking the right areas, about how, of course, you can invest close to where you live and have that as your strategy, but you don't have to. You can try and be a bit clever and pick the areas where you believe the growth potential is there. So it's pleasing to see that we are at least able to look at what's going on in these different cities in terms of all the things we always talk about, like property cycle, the fundamentals, the ripple effect, investment, all that sort of thing, and do a decent job of identifying those winners, except Aberdeen.
Indeed. So I think actually we've probably just about salvaged enough credibility for you to want to listen to our predictions for next year. And that episode will be landing in January. And at least for the cities, we've got a bit of a track record now. We're on a bit of a run. Over the last few years, we've done pretty well around the cities. So maybe listen to that bit and ignore the rest. So now it's time for our success story. After an episode where there's been some mixed success, let's make up for it by giving you a listener success story. And this one came in via email.
Yeah, I love everything about this one from Perry. Perry says, I first listened to the Property Podcast last January on a drive up to Scotland to see friends. I simply searched on Spotify for property and it came up. I hadn't listened to a podcast before, but I can safely say now I am hooked. I actually enjoy my commute to work on a Thursday so I can listen to the week's latest show. In the past 30 months, I have purchased 3 properties and moved house from a Glasgow city centre flat to a rural farmhouse. I've since gained consent to let for my Glasgow flat, so I now have 4 properties and a city centre parking space which I rent out. I'd safely say if it wasn't for being inspired by the Property Podcast, my family would not have had the confidence to take the plunge and buy a rental property. And for that, I am very grateful. Well, we are grateful to you, Perry, for sharing that success story. And really cool that you found us on Spotify. We always say this when sharing success stories, but we are very glad to sort of be there and for you to find us at the right time to give you that little bit of a kick. But all the credit for the success is yours. So well done to you.
Absolutely. I watch Joe Wick's videos and I haven't got a 6-pack, so you have to do the work. That's incredible. Well done. Now it's time for Hub Extra, the part of the show where we wanted to just give you that little bit more, and this is backed up by our weekly email that goes out every single Friday. We aim to make that email the best email, the most useful email that lands in your inbox every single week. And to get it, all you need to do is sign up on the Property Hub website. It's absolutely free to do, so you may as well take advantage of it. But just before you head off to do that, take advantage of this resource that Mr. D's lined up for everyone.
Yeah, this is an app called 1 Second Every Day. One of my New Year's resolutions for 2020, which surprisingly I actually stuck to, was taking a photo every day, because historically I've been so bad at documenting what's going on in my life, but I've always enjoyed going back and looking at the photos I have taken. And this app allows you to basically stitch together a photo from every day of the year or a short video, and it compiles it all into a video for you. So you end up with 1 second of every day. So basically you get a short video at the end of the year that summarises everything that you've been doing, which granted this year may not have been that much. But in any case, I think it's a really cool idea, and it can come up with reminders at set times if you want it to remind you to actually take that photo. But even though I am still an absolutely awful photographer and it has been a particularly dull year, I'm sure my future self will still thank me for developing that habit.
I love that, Rob. It's really good. And I'm sure in 2021, people will want to be getting out and doing more than normal. So that's a great app to capture those memories. But if you're like me and you haven't yet developed that habit, don't worry, there's a lazy person's version to help you. If you've got Apple Photos, they will collect what images you have managed to take, albeit if it's not every single day, and put little videos together for you. You may be aware of that one already, but did you know Google Photos also does that? I actually prefer what Google Photos does, just seems to do a slightly better job, at least for me anyway. So go into those apps and make sure you're taking advantage of those features, because it is lovely to look back to remind you of those moments.
So that is us done for this week. I hope you've been satisfied enough with the results of our predictions to want to listen again next week. It's Christmas Eve, but we're still going to be here bringing you the highlights of 2020. And we'll also be around on New Year's Eve bringing you our reflections of 2020. And given that it's been a really mad year, I think it's actually going to be a really, really strong episode. So please do join us for those. And until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.